Hello again, fight fans. I'm Michael Montero for Boxing Monthly. New issue is out on the shelves. You're watching the Neutral Corner for the week of June 3rd. All right, so like I said, the June issue is out for Boxing Monthly. Real cool feature inside, a 22-page heavyweight special, including an interview with Michael Spinks. So some good stuff there with some new heavyweights, some past greats, a little bit of everything. 22-page heavyweight special. Make sure you guys check out the latest issue. So June is here, and it's my birth month. Having my birthday in a couple weeks. More to come on that. This year is flying by. But those of you who follow me on Twitter and everything, you know that I went to Dallas, Texas this week. And I just wanted to check out that city, get out of LA for a few days, and we got a deal to go out there. And I'd been there before for work. Tiffany had never been, so we wanted to go really check it out, drive around, see the different areas. Ended up going to a watch party for the Brook Spence fight. And of course, Errol Spence is from DeSoto, Texas, which I think is a suburb of Dallas. He's from the Dallas area. So this watch party was, I think, hosted by people in his camp. I think a local promoter there who works with, somehow loosely affiliated with Spence, but there was some of his family members were there, some extended family, some fans, some guys that work in that gym and are related to his team and his camp. And it was interesting to see the fan reaction. He's definitely building up a little following in Dallas, in that area. And there's a market there for boxing. I just talked to a lot of the people that were at that fight party or the watch party, watching that fight live on Showtime. And they're starved for boxing action there. There's some gyms in that area. Dallas itself, as I think a drive, is maybe 4 or 5 hours from Houston. There's a scene there. 4 or 5 hour drive to San Antonio. There's a scene there. So you've got like Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, all right there in a part of Texas on the eastern side of Texas, where there's a close proximity to Mexico. There's a lot of Mexican-American immigrants. There's a lot of Black American fighters there, starting out in those gyms, young guys. So PBC, look, they've put some fights on in that area of Texas, but they need to get Errol Spence back in Dallas, not San Antonio, not Houston, but in Dallas real soon. And of course, I'll talk more about Spence later in this episode, but real quick impressions on the city of Dallas. Humid as hell. Oh my God, the air was so different there. I just got back into LA last night, and I think my sinuses are adjusting to the air difference, man. It's a lot drier here. It's a lot more humid there, so I think that's why my voice sounds a little scratchy. I'm adjusting to the air difference here. But some great food there, man. We got some real Texas barbecue. We got some of that Tex-Mex stuff, which was pretty good. A lot of bridges in Dallas. If I had to give Dallas, the city itself, a nickname, it'd be the city of bridges. There was just a million bridges everywhere. And I was surprised that there were so many lakes in Dallas. I wasn't expecting that because it's kind of landlocked. But there's all these man-made lakes and there's all these bridges that go over the lakes. And there was some pretty scenery when we got out of the city. But one thing I noticed, man, it's really sprawled. I thought LA was sprawled, but Dallas is really spread out. And I didn't realize how far, like Arlington, Texas, where they have the Dallas Cowboys Stadium, AT&T Stadium, which I went and checked out. It's massive, by the way. I've never seen a stadium that big in my life. Massive. I tweeted out a picture of it. But Arlington is, man, probably 20, 30 miles away from Dallas. the actual center city. So like downtown Dallas, you know, that's where they have, I think their basketball team plays there and their hockey team, but the baseball team and the football team plays way out in the suburbs. I didn't realize how sprawled out that area is. So, you know, really, really nice. But I think, you know, I always thought LA was a car culture because we have to drive so much here, but it's nothing compared to Dallas. Everything's really, really spread out. The bonus to that, I guess, is that everything's big and open and wide. It doesn't feel so cramped. Here in LA, I feel really, really cramped all the time. But in Dallas, everything, like, I felt like I could stretch. You know, when I was driving, we rented an SUV. So I kind of had this big old SUV, was driving around, you know, on these big highways. And like, I felt like I could like stretch out my legs and relax. And I think the people there, you guys must have like bigger yards so your kids could play in a yard with grass. So I think all in all, man, really, really nice American city. If you haven't been, check it out. I'm going to stop rambling about Dallas. Let's get into some quick news and notes. Not sure if I mentioned this in last week's episode or not, but the officials have been set for the Kovalev-Ward rematch. Tony Weeks is the ref. I actually like this choice for the ref. Robert Byrd was a fine ref in his day, but he was the ref for the first fight. I thought he did a pretty lackluster job. Wasn't horrible, but wasn't good either. I thought he was a little below average in that fight, and he's just been slipping. He's had some poor performances in recent years. So Tony Weeks right now is one of the best American refs, and for the most part, he lets guys fight physical, and perhaps that favors Ward. But if Kovalev is willing to get a little nasty and not allow Ward to just bully him on the inside and grapple and maul, and he'll do some of that nasty stuff back, which I think we saw in the first fight, I think it favors Kovalev as well. I think he's a pretty neutral ref, way better than Kenny Bayless. I think Kenny Bayless would have been a poor choice. It would have favored Andrzej Ward way too much. So I'm cool with the choice of ref. The judges, however, I think this sets things up. And I don't even know, you know, I thought about doing a preview video for this fight. I don't know if I need to. The judges are David Moretti and Glenn Feldman and Steve Weisfeld. Okay, let's start with David Moretti, who's an establishment judge. Been around too long. It's time for him to go. Boxing needs new judges. I'm not saying there should be a rule where there's an age limit or something, but perhaps once you've been a judge, let's say championship level judge for 20 years, that should be it. There should basically be, it's like in the military, right? In the American military, if you do 20 years, then you get retirement. And maybe for these state athletic commissions, they can have a guy in there for 20 years and then they say, bye-bye, they're done. And you can bring them back, you know, and they could be there's all kinds of different officials you guys don't know about. There's supervisors and all these different other players involved in a fight besides the ref and the judges. And some of these retired judges can come back and do those sorts of roles. But I think 20 years, that should be it, man. David Moretti's just been around for too long. And he's an establishment judge that favors Andrzej Ward all day. Glenn Feldman, not as bad as Moretti, hasn't been around quite as long, but he's still what I would consider an establishment judge. He's East Coast based. He works all over though, but he's an East Coast establishment judge. And I think that if you look at the way he tends to score fights, that favors Andrzej Ward as well. Steve Weisfeld, I feel, is a good judge for this fight. I'm actually cool with him judging this fight. If you look at the Joshua Klitschko fight earlier this year, Weisfeld was the only judge who had it scored correctly after 10 rounds. He had the right guy winning by the right score. If you look at some of his recent fights, some of the bigger recent fights, his scores are generally speaking on point. So all things considered, I think this is set up for a split decision victory for Andrzej Ward. I think Moretti and Feldman are going to give the fight to Ward. Kovalev will need to knock out Ward just to get a decision from those guys. Weisfeld, I think, will probably score it for Kovalev. I think we're going to see a split decision win for Andrzej Ward here, just based on the judges. Unless we see knockdowns or knockouts, that's what we're going to get. Sticking with that fight, there's been a rumor going around this week that John David Jackson was leaving Sergey Kovalev and he was going to bounce over and train Andre Ward all of a sudden. And some of the LDBC characters, some of the YouTube guys and the Twitter guys and all this jumped on that and produced videos. And there's some videos out there on some of the more popular channels in that universe that have tens of thousands of clicks. These guys know damn well that that was a rumor. It's not sourced. Nobody talked to John David Jackson or anyone at main events. I understand you're not going to get Kovalev, right? That's fine. You could reach out to representatives at main events. And if you are part of the quote-unquote media, which some of these YouTube guys kind of semi are, they have access to main events publicists. Just through emails, just through mass emails that we get. And they can reach out to those people to verify those rumors. Do they do that? No. They make videos about it to get tens of thousands of clicks, to make $100 or whatever they make. If you include their website, their Patreon pages, all this. Guys, that's the stuff that drives me nuts. Oh, by the way, obviously, none of it's true, as if I need to say that. None of it's true. Nobody sourced this stuff. It was, oh, somebody in Ward's camp, I think it was Jay Prince, validated this rumor, blah, 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 and then they're making videos about it as if that's a source, right? Again, nobody talked to John David Jackson or anybody in Kovalev's camp, and they just start making videos. They start writing stories, and you guys click it. You guys tag me in it and ask me about it, and force me to click on the story and give these guys a point. Stop buying into this shit. All that is Ward's team trying to drum up interest. I'm not saying Andre Ward had anything to do with this, okay? Has nothing to do with Andre Ward himself, because I don't think he would even go to this level. I think it's his team. I think it's certain people on his team that talked to somebody, you know, had a few drinks, smoked a little blah, 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 and talked to somebody, and it got fed over to a buddy who does YouTube videos, and boom, it blows up into a rumor, or, you know, Twitter or something like that. That's all it is. Stop clicking on this shit. Guys, how many times do I got to tell you? Stop clicking on this shit. And more than that, stop tagging me in it, because I don't want to see it. If it's not sourced, let me just give you some advice to live by when you see stories like this. It's a story involving John David Jackson, right? If there isn't a quote from John David Jackson or a representative from his side, which would be Team Kovalev main events, if there is no quote from them, no source, no link, no data, nothing, then the story is bullshit. We live in an age of fake news. Not everything's fake news. Most stuff that people call fake news is really biased news. It's usually biased news. But this is an example of straight up fucking fake news. Stop giving these guys money. It's only pennies on a click, but those pennies on a click add up. Stop feeding these trolls. It's the same shit with a couple weeks ago, the rumors that Manny Pacquiao is looking horrible in camp against preparing for Jeff Horn. And maybe this fight's going to be competitive. That's just Freddie Roach trying to drum up interest in a fight that nobody cares about. Now that didn't take off in the LDBC because that didn't fit their political agenda. Okay, but this one did. That's why they made a bunch of videos about it. But still, some of you asked me about that and we're talking about it, and that's just Freddie trolling to help promote a fight. That's what Freddie's been doing the last few years of Pacquiao's career, because he's been phoning it in since 2011, just fighting for the money. Pacquiao could give a fuck about boxing these days. Trust me, I know this. And I've heard it from people that are related to him, okay? Stop clicking on this shit. One quick note before we get into the fight reviews from last week. Summer schedule coming together, man. I talked about Ward-Kovalev, June 17th in Vegas. Talked about Pac Horn, which will be in Brisbane, Australia, July 2nd. Michael Conlon will return for his third fight on that card. In London, July 8th, Billy Joe Saunders against Adtendil Kurtzise. I still have trouble with that damn name. July 15th, here at the Forum in LA, you got that HBO triple header with that light heavyweight fight that I love between Joe Smith Jr. and Sullivan Barrera. August 26th at StubHub Center here in Los Angeles, Miguel Cotto fighting Yoshihiro Kamagai for a vacant title. Coincidentally enough, it's the title Canelo Alvarez vacated. The last fight Miguel Cotto had was a loss to Canelo Alvarez. Try to wrap your head around that. Also, September 16th, of course, the big one, Canelo Golovkin. So guys, look, we're going to have a little lull in the schedule over the next couple weeks here in June so I can party for my birthday. And then after that, late June into the rest of the summer, man, we got a loaded schedule. So we'll have lots of boxing to talk about. 2017, good shit. Let's talk about last week's action. So last Friday, the 26th in Chicago at the UIC Pavilion, in front of a crowd of only about 2,000, kind of a lackluster crowd. There was a Top Rank card, I think this was actually an Unimas, not Top Rank pay-per-view, it was Unimas. And there were several Top Rank prospects on here. So Alex Saucedo won a unanimous decision in an 8-rounder. He's now 25-0 with 15 knockouts. Here's the thing with Saucedo. This was not even a layup, okay? This fight for him, it was an easy opponent. I don't know what this does for him. The fact that it lasted 8 rounds is kind of, I don't want to say pathetic, but it's concerning for Saucedo. A guy who went pro in 2011, has 25 fights already, but he's been pro for 6 years. It's time to step up the opposition. Shit or get off the pot. This is the last time I'm going to even report about an Alex Saucedo fight unless he steps up in opposition. Because at this point, I don't give a shit. He's not an interesting prospect anymore. He's kind of a waste. It's time for him to step up the opposition. All right, so the Mean Machine scores a 6th-round knockout. This is a prospect I want to see more of. Egidijus Kavaliauskas. I think I got that name right finally. He improves to 17-0 with 14 knockouts. The problem with this guy is Top Rank hasn't got him on TV yet. Get him on freaking HBO, man. Get this guy on regular television. Match him up against a Golden Boy prospect so that you can get him on one of Golden Boy's ESPN dates. Do something, because this guy is fan-friendly and he needs to be on TV more. Michael Conlon had an absolute layup. He wins. He's now 2-0 with 2 knockouts. As I talked about a second ago, he'll be on that Pacquiao undercard in Australia. And Mike Alvarado has come back, fought a few times in the last couple years after losing badly to Brandon Rios in their rubber match in Denver, Colorado. He scores a 2nd-round knockout to an opponent who has now lost 3 in a row. So I don't know what this means for Mike Alvarado. Maybe they're going to try to wiggle him into a title shot. I don't know how that's justifiable at this point. Maybe they'll use him to build up one of their prospects. I think that would be the smart thing to do. We'll see what happens there. But real quick comment about the crowd. Yeah, there's only about 2,000 fans or so, and some people are looking at it as this major, major loss. Well, look, it was a card full of prospects. There were no stars here. Michael Conlon had a big, big coming out party in his pro debut in New York, but that was during St. Patrick's Day parade, and there were thousands of people there to see the fight Saturday between Golovkin and Jacobs. So it made sense, and they worked out package deals and all that kind of stuff to get people to travel over. It worked. It made sense. This was a fight during Labor Day weekend in Chicago, which, yes, there is an ethnic population. You had Mexicans on this card. There's Mexicans there. You had a Lithuanian. There's Lithuanians there. There's Irish people in Chicago, too. There's a boxing market in Chicago. But this probably wasn't the right venue, probably wasn't the right date, and there wasn't a TV deal for this fight either, a major TV deal. This was on Unimas. So all in all, this was kind of a stay busy card, testing out that market, testing out the waters. No doubt Top Rank will be back, and some of these fighters will be back. Vasyl Lomachenko, we're going to see him in Chicago soon. So Chicago fight fans that did go and you're discouraged, don't be. Top Rank's going to be back, and I do think we'll see more boxing in general in Chicago because there's a good market there. Okay, also on Friday in Cardiff, Wales, Andrew Selby scored a unanimous decision win over Christopher Rosales. This was actually a WBC flyweight semifinal eliminator. There's kind of a 4-man tournament going on right now to determine who's going to fight for that flyweight title. Selby's now 9-0 with 5 knockouts. He was dropped in the first round. And Rosales has been in there with some decent fighters, so he knows a thing or two. He's a good opponent. But for Selby to be dropped early in this fight and then go 12 rounds with this guy, a little concerning. And I talked about Selby last week that they're kind of pushing him, right? You know, more than, I can't think of the other Selby right now that he's related to. Not Andrew Selby. Whatever. Let me take that back. Fuck. Lee Selby. And I talked about this last week. You know, they're moving Andrew Selby pretty fast, faster than Lee Selby. But at this point, you know, they got to look at something here because I don't know. I feel he should have looked better in this fight against Rosales. Maybe there was something going on, an injury, something I haven't heard about. If any of you have heard something, let me know. But at this point, he should have looked better than he looked in this fight against that level of opposition. Also in Boca Raton, Kanat Islam, Chinese Kazakh fighter who now is based in Florida, improves to 24-0, 19 knockouts with a unanimous decision over Norberto Gonzalez. For Islam, I think he's an interesting prospect. I think he's ready for bigger fights. I think he's ready to take on some of the, not the very top of the division, but a top 10 guy. I think he's there. It's now or never for him. Look, Islam is 32 years old, 5'10", 70-inch reach, had a good amateur career. So far as a pro, he's fought in 5 different countries. So he's been around the block. He knows how it is to fight in different markets, different regions. He won a bronze medal in the 2008 Beijing Games. He was in the World Series of Boxing between 2010 and 2012, I think. It was a couple seasons, I think he fought. So he's good, well-rounded experience now. I think it's ready to step him up. I think he's there. He lacks power. He still punches like an amateur sometimes. So I think he's going to have trouble at the top of that junior middleweight division. That is a good division at the very, very top. But with his boxing skills, I think he can work his way into a title shot very soon, into an eliminator type of fight. He needs to go up against somebody in the top 10, 15 right now. I think he's there. This Gonzalez guy, you know, he was stopped just by comparison. This Norberto Gonzalez, who Islam just fought, he was stopped by Terrell Boucher in 2 rounds. He was stopped by Jamal Charlo in 7 rounds. He went all 8, though, in an 8-rounder against Erickson Lubin. So sometimes styles make fights and everything, but those heavy hitters, you know, like Charlo's, that level of fighter is getting a guy like Norberto Gonzalez out of there. And for Islam not to do that tells me he's just not quite at that level. So do I think he beats the Charlos, the Andres? No. At this stage of Islam de Lara's career, because he doesn't hit very hard, maybe he could beat him. You know, maybe. I'm not saying he would, but I'm saying he's ready to challenge for that level just under that. So it'd be interesting. Another Kazakh prospect, Zankaz Turovov, improved to 21-0 with 15 knockouts. He's nowhere near ready for a top 15 fighter yet. I think he's only fought in like 1 10-rounder. They're still building him up. They need to start getting him some better opposition now. He just doesn't have enough opposition yet for me to really, really get excited. So that's enough with the Friday night action. Let's talk about the big cards on Saturday. Before we get to the big one in Sheffield, Orlando Salido stays busy, wins by 7th round retirement in Sonora, Mexico. He was kind of hurt early. Didn't look great in this fight. But look, he's been off for a while, and he's getting up there in age. He's been in some wars. He kind of needed this fight to get ready if he's going to fight Vasyl Lomachenko. But based on what we saw here, and I'll be honest, based on what we saw against Francisco Vargas when he fought him in the fight of the year last year, based on what we've seen with Lomachenko the last couple years since he fought Salido, I think that not only does Lomachenko beat Salido in the rematch, I think he stops him. But that would be a kind of a gold watch retirement kind of a fight for Salido. You know, he could get one last big payday, and he's got options. He can always fight if he wants to do, you know, if he loses to Lomachenko, there's no shame in that. He can still have a major cash out fight back in Mexico against even somebody like Francisco Vargas. There's options for him, right? And he could even now, he's relocated here. He lives in the United States. He's a resident here, I think in Arizona. He could do a homecoming fight there and call it a career. So he's got options. But he stays busy, gets a win. And Anselmo Moreno, Panamanian fighter, who's been one of the better bantamweights in recent years. He lost by TKO3 to a Mexican fighter, Julio Ceja. You guys might remember Ceja got almost decapitated, I think in a first round knockout last year. But he was a good quality, scrappy fighter. And now for Moreno, he's lost 2 in a row. He's lost 5 of his last 8. As I mentioned before, one of the better bantamweights in recent years, but it looks like he's pretty much done right now. This was in Panama City. This was set up for Moreno to win, because remember, like I just said, Ceja was coming off that knockout loss last year, and for him to lose by TKO3, or by KO3 I should say, it's pretty much over for this guy. And on to Sheffield, where there was 2 good fights here. Let me start with the co-feature, where George Groves scores a TKO6 win over Fedor Chudinov to win the WBA super middleweight title, the vacant super middleweight title. So for George Groves, finally he grabs a title here. And look, it's not a legitimate title. It's paper thin. This magazine paper stock is thicker than that title. But George Groves is one of those guys who has fought his ass off, carved out a good career for himself, fan favorite, can't be in a bad fight. So you can't help but be happy for the guy. Now, here's what's set up, okay? If you're Groves, I think there's 2 viable options here. Unfortunately, and I talked about this last week, I think, Paul Smith is fighting for the WBA regular title coming up here. Now, Groves beat him by TKO2, I think in 2011, right? And Smith is fighting on June 17th, I think the same day as the Ward-Kovalev rematch. Yeah, I think he's fighting over in Germany against some German guy that doesn't matter. Smith's probably going to win that fight. So if Smith does come away with that fight, the WBA will probably mandate a rematch between George Groves and Paul Smith. Does anybody in their right mind want to see that fight? I think Groves wins again. I think he wins again by dominant knockout. And it would, consolidate the WBA super middleweight title, which would be completely meaningless. There's also another fight, though. And I think this would be the more viable option if he can make it happen. In between all of that, James DeGale doesn't have a dance partner, right? These 2 fought in 2011, and George Groves won by majority decision. I think that DeGale only had like 10 or 11 fights at that time. He was really just a prospect. And many people feel that DeGale won that fight. Media, fans, most felt that DeGale deserved that win. So it's always kind of been a sore spot for James DeGale. Well, he just had that fight, that tough fight early this year with Badu Jack, where he got his tooth busted out. I'm sure he'd love to get in line for this WBA super middleweight title. So maybe a rematch could be worked out between those 2. Considering the history, considering that it's for a title, whether you care about the title or not, all things considered, Eddie Hearn would put together a good production here. Do I think it's big enough to headline on its own? I don't know about that. I think it could be the main event, but it'd need a strong co-feature. But either way, I do think it's a viable fight over there in the UK. And I think it would do a good crowd, good ratings. So, good place to be if you're George Groves. Especially, again, if Paul Smith wins in a couple weeks. You got 2 really good options. And maybe you could do them back-to-back to set up 2 big paydays, right? You'd have to favor DeGale, obviously, to beat George Groves if those 2 fought. So, maybe it could be worked out where he fights Paul Smith first. Or maybe if the German wins, he ends up fighting him. Who knows? Good place to be, though, if you're George Groves. And for a guy like him who's done it the hard way and really, worked it out, ironed out a tough, hard scrabble career, good for him, man. Now, look, main event. Errol Spence scores a 11th round KO over Kell Brook. And Kell Brook really just took a knee. It wasn't really a punch that did it. It was an accumulation of shots that busted up Brook's left eye. It was the right eye against Golovkin that got busted up. That was, had all these surgeries, titanium plates, all this kind of stuff. So it was interesting to see. That eye looked great, looked absolutely fine. It was the other eye that looked bad. A lot of people were wondering, how did that happen? Well, Spence is a southpaw. He's jabbing with the right hand, right? He's coming through here with the right hand. That's going right to Brook's left eye. And also, southpaw hooks with the right hand. And Spence was throwing some good hooks, but it was mainly that jab that he started setting up that really started to take effect, I saw in the middle rounds. That busted up that eye, man. And it started to take an effect toward the, I don't know, I want to say the 8th round, somewhere in there, 9th round. And that's where Spence really just took over the fight. Look, 6 rounds through, I had this thing scored 4 rounds to 2 for Brook. And I was at this fight party with probably 200 people, all going, all Dallas people. And some of these people were Errol Spence family members, and they were all going for Spence. And I was, people were asking me how I scored it, and I was, 6 rounds through, I got Brook ahead. And some people were giving me shit, but I'm like, hey, I know what I'm talking about. And sure enough, it was funny because right after I said that, Showtime, they showed their scoring, and Steve Farhood scored it exactly the same way I did. So like as soon as I said that, people were giving me hell. Boom, they put Steve Farhood's score up there. And then like some people were like, all right, they were giving me some props. But most of the people there were just booing. It was a heavy fan. It was basically the opposite fan feeling of what you guys that were there in Sheffield felt, just obviously a much smaller scale. But really, the second half of this fight is where Spence took over. And this was another issue or another case of, I just think, youth being served. And I know that sounds funny because Brook isn't that old. It's not like this is Klitschko, who's in his 40s, going up against, Joshua, who's in his 20s, in his physical prime. It's not necessarily the case here. But for Brook, I do think he's aged well beyond his years. Not just because of what's happened in the ring recently, but what is rumored to have been going on outside the ring for the past 4 or 5 years. And, look, I write for a British fight magazine. I talk to a lot of guys over there all the time, and I've heard a lot of stuff about Brook. So maybe some of it is exaggerated, but these rumors don't get started from nowhere. So, and there's certain things that just aren't rumors. He's had legal issues and stuff like that, crazy attacks and stabbings in the past. There's a lot going on there. So I think he's one of these guys that is going to have a very quick rise and fall. And the cumulative effects of the stronger, younger, more athletic, heavier hitting Spence wearing him down, man, by the 9th round, this fight was over. It was over. After 8 rounds, I had this thing, I tweeted that I could see 5-3 Brook. I was thinking the hometown judges might have it 5-3 Brook. But I also tweeted, this thing could be 4-4 after 8. But that was really because Brook built up an early lead. By the middle rounds, the momentum of the fight was in Spence's favor. And by the end of the 8th, 9th round there, it was all Spence. And man, the beating that he put on Kell Brook in that 10th round, the absolute ass whooping he put on Kell Brook. And for Brook to take that, he took a knee in the 10th because he was busted up, accumulation of shots. He didn't look that hurt to me. He was, don't get me wrong, guys, he was hurt. But he didn't look like he was on Queer Street. To me, it looked more like he was having issues with the eye and he just needed a break. In the 11th round, you could tell he thought about taking a knee a couple times and said, fuck it, and kept fighting. And then there was one part where he just kind of really winced. He really winked. And it was almost like he was testing out the eye for vision. Like he was trying to clear up, like he had some blurriness. He was trying to clear it up. And then he said, fuck it, and just took a knee. And he looked over at his corner and he said something. I think he said, I can't see, but I don't know what he said. It was hard to tell. But that was it. So for Spence, this type of victory on the road against a guy who before the Golovkin fight, I considered the best welterweight. Probably wasn't the best welterweight going into the Spence fight. Kell Brook didn't look as good in this fight as he looked against Sean Porter, in my opinion. Just didn't have the same sprightliness about him, the same pop. A lot of that had to do with Errol Spence, don't get me wrong, but I'm talking about from the beginning of the fight. As I saw him walking to the ring, he kept doing this with his mouth, right? His mouth was dry. He wasn't the same vibrant, bright guy that entered the ring against Shawn Porter a couple years ago here in LA, or even against Gennady Golovkin last year. So, you know, the Golovkin fight had an effect. The moving up, moving down in weight had an effect. The surgery, the layoff, the recovery had an effect. The outside of the ring lifestyle had an effect. But for Spence to go over there and do that to this guy who's still probably a top 5 welterweight right now, even after this fight, pretty damn impressive. I think Errol Spence is the goods. I don't know if he's the #1 welterweight yet. I still give Keith Thurman the #1 welterweight ranking right now, but it's really 1A and 1B. It's between Keith Thurman and Errol Spence. And the only reason I give Thurman a little bit higher of a ranking right now, and I know a lot of you out there will disagree with me, beating Danny Garcia and then beating Shawn Porter, right? He's beat several top 10, top 15 welterweights now. He's unified titles. I just think he's done a little bit more. It's different than the heavyweight division with Anthony Joshua, this guy, beating an all-time great and doing it in the fashion he did. And then also, there's no other top guy in that division. You know, it's maybe Deontay Wilder, but Deontay Wilder's done shit. In the welterweight division, it's a little more top-heavy. There's more top fighters. And I just think Spence, great victory, but you got to give Thurman that #1 spot. People are asking what's next for Spence. Keith Thurman's out for the rest of the year, right? And we know that Shawn Porter recently won, I guess, an eliminator to earn a rematch with Keith Thurman. But Porter is not the type of guy that likes to lay around in that fight. So would Shawn Porter take a fight later this year, maybe this fall, with Errol Spence? I'm sure he maybe would, but it'd have to make sense financially. It would have to make sense financially. Maybe it would, because there's a title on the line now. Now Spence has the IBF title, so maybe Porter would say, you know what, forget about the Keith Thurman rematch. Been there, done that. I see something in this youngster that I could take advantage of. I've learned a thing or two from fights with Kell Brook, his own fight with Kell Brook, fights with Keith Thurman, right? I've learned a thing or two that I can apply to Errol Spence. I would love to see that fight. I think that would be a very good, another test for Errol Spence to see if he's really the truth. And I think that it could be a big event in Dallas. I think they could sell out a venue there. You know, of course it wouldn't go to AT&T Stadium, nothing like that. But maybe it could go to the basketball stadium there or something like that. It could, I don't know if it'd sell that venue out, but it would probably do at least 10, 15,000. I'd have to think if they promoted it the right way, it could do a crowd like that. And then you get a good title fight. And the winner of that fights Keith Thurman next year. Consolidate this whole thing at welterweight because Manny Pacquiao is a non-factor. I'd love to see that. But right now, man, Errol Spence is the great hope of American boxing. The way that Anthony Joshua is the great hope for heavyweight boxing, for British boxing, Errol Spence is the great hope for American boxing. It's not Andre Ward, because even if Andre Ward beats Sergey Kovalev, what's he going to do after that? Nothing we care about. There's so many potential fights for Errol Spence over the years coming up. Eventually, he's going to be at 154 pounds. There's some real talent there. There's always going to be talent at 140, moving up to 147 to possibly challenge Spence. So if he ended up getting Shawn Porter, getting Keith Thurman, winning those fights, being the top welterweight, being American, being a humble, likable, down-to-earth guy who seems to really get it, being from a major American city like Dallas. You know, it's a top 10 American city that has, I think, 7 million people is the metro population of Dallas. It's starving for boxing action. That's a heavy sports market down there. There's so much potential to this kid. He's absolutely the great boxing hope for America, in my opinion. All right, so real quick, there's only some limited action this week. There's a LA Fight Club card that's back on June 2nd this Friday with Azat Hovhannissian will be on that card, and undefeated prospect Alexis Rocha, so check that out. Those are always fun fights, and they're free, they're streaming, so check it out, man. Saturday in Montreal in the Bell Center, we get the rematch between Adonis Stevenson and Andrzej Fonfara. For Stevenson, he hasn't fought since last July, and that was only 4 rounds in a complete mismatch. For Fonfara, he just fought in March, 10 rounds. This is for the WBC light heavyweight title. These two guys fought back in 2014, no reason to go back into their first match too much. You look at who they fought since that fight, though. Adonis Stevenson has fought Dmitry Sokovsky, Saki Obika, a completely faded shot Saki Obika, Tommy Karpinski, and of course Thomas Williams, that last fight last July. For Fonfara, he came back from that loss with a gimme fight against Dudu Jumbu. But then after that, man, he fought Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., Nathan Cleverly, Joe Smith Jr., which obviously he took a big loss in that fight. But he came straight back from that fight to Chad Dawson. A completely shot Chad Dawson, but a completely shot Chad Dawson still has more skills than any of the fighters Stevenson has fought since that first fight. So this is set up for Fonfara to score the upset. I still don't think he will, though. You got to favor Adonis Stevenson. In the co-feature, Eleider Alvarez is fighting Jean Pascal, who's only 34 years old, but he feels like he's 40 years old. He feels like an ancient 34. I think this is set up for Alvarez to score a big knockout win and make a statement here. Alvarez won the WBC light heavyweight silver title, which is basically their mandatory title, back in October of 2014. He's defended it multiple times. He had 3 fights in 2015, 2 in 2016. This will be his 2nd fight this year. And he still hasn't got a crack at Stevenson. If both of these guys win this year, or win in this fight, I expect that they will fight finally later this year. And I think Alvarez will win because he's pissed. Rightfully so. Pascal has lost 2 of his last 4. It should be 3 of his last 4 because he got a gift over Yunieski Gonzalez. So I like Adonis Stevenson and Eleider Alvarez by knockout, and I think they finally fight this fall in Montreal. Guys, that's it for this week. Let me know what you think. Like, comment, share, subscribe. I'll see you at the fights.